Imagine a world without streetlights, CCTV cameras, or 9/11. A world where law enforcement didn't negotiate, mediate, or delay. Welcome to medieval England, a land of castles, bustling markets, dark forests, and dangers lurking at every corner. You might think crime today is risky, but back then, even a single mistake could cost you your life. And that's if you were lucky enough to be caught at all. Today, we'll explore why, if you were a criminal in medieval England, you wouldn't survive even a single day. Medieval England, roughly spanning the 5th to the 15th century, was a society built on hierarchy and law. Nobles resided in fortified castles, wielding power and influence. Peasants tilled the fields, bound to their lords by duty and obligation. Everyone knew their place, and stepping out of line could result in instant punishment. Leniency was rare. Justice was swift, public, and brutal. In towns, life was a mix of commerce, gossip, and fear. Markets were bustling, full of merchants and customers, but even here, theft was common. People stole bread, tools, livestock, or coins, not out of malice, but survival. Yet being caught didn't mean a fine or a brief scolding. It could mean public humiliation, physical pain, or death. Public executions were the ultimate warning. Everyone watched, everyone learned, and fear became a tool to enforce the law. Crime wasn't limited to murder or highway robbery. Most offenses were petty, stealing bread, pilfering livestock, or trespassing. Yet even these small acts could have devastating consequences. Steal a loaf of bread from a baker or a nobleman's estate? You risked the stocks, whipping, or execution. Steal livestock? Hanging was likely. The logic was simple. Property was sacred, and taking what wasn't yours threatened the social order. Beyond theft, crimes such as arson, assault, and treason were punished with horrifying severity. A single fire could destroy an entire village, so arsonists were often burned alive. Treason or rebellion against the king? Hanging, drawing, and quartering awaited, painful, slow, and gruesome. Murder? Hanging at dawn in the town square was common. Justice in medieval England was not about rehabilitation. It was about deterrence, spectacle, and the preservation of order. Even minor acts of violence were treated harshly. Assault could result in public whipping, maiming, or imprisonment. Punishment wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Criminals were paraded through towns, displayed, humiliated, and shamed. The message was clear. Step out of line, and your life would become a warning to all. Unlike today's centralized police, law enforcement relied on local communities. One critical system was the tithing. Every 10 men in a village were collectively responsible for each other's behavior. If one man committed a crime, the other 9 could be punished. This meant that hiding from the law was extremely difficult. Neighbors had incentives to report crimes. Failure could bring punishment for the entire group. Constables and sheriffs were appointed by the crown or local lords to maintain order, but their presence was limited. They relied on authority, intimidation, and support from the populace. In many cases, villagers themselves became enforcers. If someone stole from the local market, a mob could chase, beat, or kill them, legally. In medieval England, survival as a criminal wasn't just about avoiding the authorities. It was about outsmarting your neighbors, who often had the law on their side. Justice wasn't private, it was a performance. Stocks, pillories, and whipping posts were designed to humiliate as much as punish. A thief might sit in a public square for hours or days, exposed to sun, rain, and mockery. Rotten food, mud, or even stones might be thrown at them. The goal wasn't just retribution, it was to terrify the community into compliance.
Serious crimes had grimmer consequences. Hanging was the most common execution method, often performed publicly to ensure everyone witnessed the fate of the criminal. For nobles or high-status offenders, beheading was preferred, but still public. Heretics, arsonists, and witches could be burned at the stake. And treason? Hanging, drawing, and quartering, the ultimate in medieval cruelty, served as a warning for miles. Imagine trying to steal a loaf of bread, only to be dragged to the town square, stripped, whipped, and executed, all before sunset. Survival required stealth, intelligence, and luck beyond measure. Even the cleverest criminals often met their end far sooner than expected. So, you've stolen a loaf of bread, or perhaps a cow. Maybe you've angered the wrong noble. You've made your first misstep in medieval England. Now what? The reality is harsh. Once marked as a criminal, your life becomes a desperate struggle for survival. Outlaws were considered outside the law entirely. That means anyone could attack, beat, or kill you, and no one would intervene. Even the common villagers could see you as fair game, and the law would not protect you. The forests of medieval England were both sanctuary and prison. Dense, dark, and teeming with wildlife, they offered a place to hide from law enforcement, but survival there was far from easy. Wolves, bears, and other predators were real threats, and starvation was an ever-present danger. A criminal could not simply wander through the woods. They had to be skilled in stealth, tracking, and finding food. Even small mistakes, making noise, leaving footprints, or being spotted by a hunter could be fatal. Being an outlaw meant constant vigilance. Travelers could be ambushed, markets could be patrolled by armed constables, and villagers were often incentivized to report strangers. It wasn't unusual for a wanted criminal to be betrayed by someone they thought was a friend or even a relative. Trust was a luxury you could not afford. Every interaction could be your last. Life outside the law was a test of endurance. Outlaws had to forage for food, hunt small animals, and sometimes steal from farms to survive. But stealing brought its own dangers. Any farmer could call for help, raise a posse, or even shoot on sight. Catching food was not just a matter of skill. It required constant awareness, planning, and luck. The forests did not forgive mistakes, and exposure to the elements, cold rain, freezing nights, sweltering days, could be deadly. Shelter was another concern. Outlaws often slept under trees or in caves, but these were far from safe. Human enemies, vigilantes, rival criminals, or local militias could discover them at any moment. A single misstep could mean capture, whipping, or execution. And even if you avoided humans, disease, insects, and starvation were relentless threats. Life as a fugitive in medieval England was brutal, relentless, and often short-lived. To survive, outlaws had to be cunning. They needed to know the terrain intimately, moving quietly and carefully, often traveling only at night. They learned to hide their tracks, avoid villages, and use disguises. Some criminals adopted new identities, changed their clothing, or even pretended to be travelers or beggars. Yet the risk of recognition was constant. Bounties were common, and rewards for capturing criminals motivated villagers to remain vigilant.
Even the cleverest criminals could not escape the network of medieval justice. Towns and villages were interconnected, and sheriffs often coordinated with local authorities to track down offenders. Hunters and tracking dogs could be deployed, while knights or soldiers might be sent to capture more dangerous criminals. In short, every step outside the law required intelligence, awareness, and sheer luck. Some outlaws became legendary for their ability to evade capture. Sherwood Forest, associated with the legendary Robin Hood, is the most famous example. Dense and vast, it offered opportunities for hiding, ambushing, and survival. Yet even Robin Hood's companions faced constant danger. The forest was filled with armed patrols, wild animals, and the ever-present threat of starvation. Other forests, like the New Forest in Hampshire or the Forest of Dean, were equally treacherous. Patrolled by foresters loyal to the crown, trespassers could be fined, imprisoned, or executed. Being caught in a royal forest was particularly dangerous. The king's justice applied with even greater severity than in a regular village, and the punishment could be instant and lethal. Day-to-day survival for a criminal involved constant movement and alertness. Hunting or scavenging food, avoiding patrols, and managing wounds or sickness were daily challenges. Clothing had to be practical and inconspicuous, yet warm enough for freezing nights. Outlaws needed basic knowledge of herbs, plants, and water sources to survive. Without this knowledge, the forest could become a tomb rather than a refuge. Beyond physical survival, outlaws faced constant psychological strain. The fear of capture, betrayal, or injury weighed heavily. Social isolation, lack of hygiene, and constant hunger made life miserable. Few lasted more than a few weeks or months in this state. Even those who survived for years, like Robin Hood in legend, required skill, cunning, and constant vigilance. For the average person transported to medieval England, the odds were staggering against survival. Now, imagine yourself in this scenario. You are a modern person, used to technology, fast food, and medical care. Suddenly, you are an outlaw in medieval England. You lack the survival skills, knowledge of the terrain, and understanding of medieval society. Hunger, cold, and disease would quickly overwhelm you. You might think you could hide, but neighbors would report you, patrols would hunt you, and the king's justice would show no mercy. Survival is not just a question of courage. It requires skills most modern people don't possess. In essence, being a criminal in medieval England was like walking a tightrope over a pit of fire while blindfolded. Every misstep, every wrong move could mean your end. And unlike today, no one was coming to rescue you. Law, community, and nature all worked against you. Even for skilled and clever criminals, survival was never guaranteed. So, if you thought living as a criminal in modern times was tough, remember, medieval England was a world where the law was harsh, unforgiving, and omnipresent. A day as a criminal could be your last. And even the forests, the only place for hope, were filled with danger and death. This is just the beginning of understanding why you wouldn't last a day. So far, we've explored the dangers of theft, the harshness of tithings, and the perils of living as an outlaw in medieval England. But what about those who actually became famous or infamous for breaking the law? Even the cleverest criminals often met grim ends. Their stories reveal just how unforgiving the medieval justice system really was. Today, we will journey through the lives and fates of real criminals, some infamous, some obscure, and learn why survival was nearly impossible. Take Thomas de Lacy, for example, a thief who dared to steal from the king's treasury. In an age when royal property was sacrosanct, such a crime was unthinkable. De Lacy believed he could outsmart the royal guards, but surveillance was constant and betrayal was common. Within days, he was captured, tried publicly, and executed. His body was displayed in the town square as a warning. The message was clear. The king's property was untouchable, and punishment was immediate and merciless. Thomas's story is not unique. Many who dared to steal from the powerful met similar fates. Medieval England had little tolerance for audacity, especially when it challenged the social hierarchy. Not all criminals were thieves. Some, like Alice Kitteler, were accused of witchcraft, a crime that terrified medieval society. In 1324, Alice faced accusations of using sorcery to harm her neighbors. Her case demonstrates how the medieval justice system extended beyond theft and violence. It targeted social deviance, superstition, and fear itself. Alice managed to flee, but her associates were not so lucky. They were arrested, tortured, and burned at the stake. Her story illustrates that even social manipulation or alleged magical powers could result in death, and fleeing was often the only hope for survival. In medieval England, the law extended to moral and social crimes. Accusations of witchcraft, heresy, or blasphemy could lead to torture, execution, and complete social erasure. Survival depended not only on cunning, but on luck, social status, and sometimes connections to the powerful. Some criminals were nobles themselves. Fulk Fitzwarren, for instance, became an outlaw after rebelling against the crown in the early 12th century. Unlike common thieves, he had access to weapons, horses, and loyal followers. Yet even he faced relentless pursuit by royal forces. Fulk Fitzwarren's story shows that status offered some protection, but did not guarantee survival. Outlaws, regardless of social standing, lived in constant danger, forced to fight, flee, and hide indefinitely. His adventures became legendary, but many nobles who tried similar rebellions were hanged, mutilated, or exiled. The key takeaway is clear. Even the resourceful and well-equipped were at the mercy of the law. Without skill, luck, and relentless caution, survival was nearly impossible. Highwaymen were another type of criminal in medieval England. Robbers who targeted travelers on roads between towns. Stories of these men often evoke romantic images, but reality was brutal. Most highwaymen were captured quickly, tortured for confessions, and publicly executed. Their crimes might involve clever ambushes or intimidation, but the law and local communities were vigilant. Even hiding in forests, these criminals faced hunger, betrayal, and exposure. Surviving a single day as a highwayman required extraordinary skill, a network of allies, and luck beyond measure. Most failed, leaving behind bodies displayed on gallows as warnings. The few who succeeded became legends in folklore, but they were the exceptions, not the rule. Petty thieves, such as those who stole bread, tools, or minor livestock, were the most common offenders. Yet even these minor criminals faced harsh consequences. Stocks, whipping, mutilation, or hanging were frequent punishments. Town records from the 14th century often describe thieves being chained in the town square, their heads shaved, and face exposed to public ridicule. Villagers threw rotten food, mud, and even stones to further humiliate them. These punishments weren't just physical, they were psychological, designed to leave a lasting scar on the victim and the community. Survival as a petty thief required stealth, cunning, and absolute avoidance of detection, an almost impossible feat in tightly knit medieval communities.
The harsh reality is that crime was rarely profitable. Even small gains came with extreme risk, and the law did not hesitate to make examples out of offenders. One mistake, one misstep, could be fatal. Medieval justice was public, and this spectacle had a chilling effect on would-be criminals. Executions,
Floggings and mutilations were often carried out in the town square or along the main road, where everyone could witness the consequences. The bodies of traitors might be hung in chains, quartered, or displayed in prominent locations. For common thieves, stocks and pillories made criminals subjects of ridicule for days. The message was unmistakable. Disobedience was not tolerated, and survival outside the law was a near impossibility. Even observing these punishments could instill fear. Criminals knew that discovery, even minor, would lead to swift and merciless consequences. And the medieval mindset ensured that almost everyone accepted this system. Fear, shame, and pain were as much tools of control as legal statutes themselves. Some criminals survived for years, but these were exceptions. Legends like Robin Hood depict clever, skilled outlaws who evade capture, outwit authorities, and help the poor. Historical evidence suggests that real-life counterparts existed, but survival required exceptional cunning, deep knowledge of the terrain, loyal allies, and a constant readiness for violence. Most criminals, lacking these advantages, were captured within days. Survival was rare, temporary, and always uncertain. Even a single slip-up, a noisy movement in the forest, a careless theft, a friendly betrayal could end a life. In medieval England, the margin for error was zero. Criminals were hunted not just by officials, but by society itself, motivated by law, reward, and fear. The stories of Thomas de Lacy, Alice Cateler, Fulk Fitzwarren, and countless unnamed thieves paint a grim picture. Medieval England was unforgiving, brutal, and relentless. Criminals faced starvation, exposure, betrayal, and death at every turn. Even cleverness, courage, and skill were often not enough. For the average person, a single day outside the law was a gamble with near certain defeat. By now, it's clear. Breaking the law in medieval England was a gamble with near certain peril. But what did punishment actually look like? The answer is stark, graphic, and unrelenting. The type of crime you committed dictated the severity of your fate, and the methods of punishment were designed not only to punish, but to terrify. Let's take a closer look at the consequences for different crimes. Theft was the most common crime in medieval England. Stealing a loaf of bread, livestock, or coins could land you in serious trouble. Minor thefts often resulted in public humiliation. Stocks and pillories were standard. Thieves would be chained by the wrists and ankles, forced to sit or stand in the town square for hours or days. Villagers would throw rotten vegetables, mud, and even stones at the offender. The goal was clear: shame the criminal, teach the community, and deter others. For more serious thefts, especially stealing from nobles or the king's property, hanging was common. The noose became a symbol of justice. In some cases, thieves were hanged at crossroads or near the site of their crime, a gruesome warning to all who might follow in their footsteps. Even skilled pickpockets or cunning thieves faced near certain capture and execution if caught. Murder was treated with extreme severity. If someone killed another person, hanging was the standard punishment for commoners. The execution was often public, drawing large crowds to witness the consequences of violence. For noble victims, the punishment could be more elaborate, sometimes involving mutilation before death, to demonstrate the severity of the crime and the protection afforded to the upper classes. The logic behind such brutality was simple. In a society without modern policing, deterrence relied on visibility. If everyone knew that murder meant hanging in the town square, fewer people would risk committing it. Yet even with deterrence, desperation and anger drove countless crimes, ensuring that execution grounds were never empty.
Arson was especially feared. A single fire could devastate an entire village or town, destroying homes, barns, and crops. Those caught-setting fires faced burning at the stake. The condemned were tied to a wooden pole, often with kindling arranged around them, and then ignited. Death by fire was slow, agonizing, and terrifying. It was both punishment and public spectacle. Villagers would gather to witness the fate of the arsonist and to internalize the cost of such a crime. Even accidental fires could have consequences if negligence was suspected. Medieval society prioritized the safety of property and community over individual life. If your actions led to fire, punishment was swift and harsh. Treason was the most serious crime of all. Defying the king, plotting rebellion, or harming royal property invoked the harshest penalties. The infamous punishment of hanging, drawing, and quartering was reserved for traitors. The condemned would be hanged until near death, then disemboweled, beheaded, and their body cut into pieces. These pieces were displayed in public locations, city gates, crossroads, or near castles, as warnings of the crown's power. Survival was impossible for traitors. Mercy was rare, and executions were theatrical and terrifying. The message to the populace was unmistakable. The king's authority was absolute, and any challenge was met with unimaginable consequences. Even noble status did not guarantee immunity. Rebellion was punished mercilessly, and survival depended solely on evasion, loyalty, or extreme luck. Not all crimes were physical. Medieval society also punished moral and social deviance with equal severity. Blasphemy, heresy, and accusations of witchcraft could lead to execution by burning, often after torture or forced confession. Women accused of witchcraft, like Alice Cateler, faced suspicion, imprisonment, and death. Social crimes, such as defying feudal duties or disrespecting nobles, could result in flogging, fines, or public humiliation. These punishments reinforced the social hierarchy and ensured obedience to both law and custom. Such punishments served a dual purpose, removing the criminal from society and sending a warning to others. Fear of divine and earthly consequences kept communities in check and discouraged theft or rebellion. In addition to public executions, mutilation was common. Thieves might have hands cut off, ears cropped, or noses slit. Assault offenders could be branded or whipped. Mutilation served as both punishment and permanent mark of shame. A criminal's body became a visible testament to the consequences of law-breaking. People could literally see the cost of crime on the offender's body for years to come. Escape was possible, but reintegration into society was almost impossible with such markings. Medieval justice was designed to be unforgettable. Each punishment was crafted to strike fear, deter crime, and reinforce the social order. Surviving a day in such a system was not only about avoiding capture, it was about understanding every law, anticipating every danger, and being prepared for relentless physical and psychological threats. To summarize, crime in medieval England was met with a terrifying array of punishments. Theft, stocks, pillories, public humiliation, hanging. Murder, public hanging, sometimes mutilation. Arson, burning at the stake. Treason, hanging, drawing, and quartering. Witchcraft, blasphemy. Torture, burning, public execution. Assault, whipping, maiming, branding. The methods were brutal, visible, and designed to make an example of the offender. No one could escape the law easily, and even cleverness or skill was often insufficient. One mistake could end a life instantly. For the modern mind, it's almost unimaginable. A petty theft today might earn a fine or probation. In medieval England, the same act could mean public humiliation, pain, or death. And for more serious crimes, the methods were unimaginably cruel. The stakes were life and death, and the law enforced them without hesitation. By now, you know that crime in medieval England came with brutal punishments, relentless law enforcement, and terrifying consequences. But even if you avoided capture, surviving as a criminal was a daily struggle, an exhausting, relentless battle against hunger, weather, rivals, and human treachery. Let's examine what a single day in the life of a medieval criminal truly looked like. Food was never guaranteed. Unlike today, where convenience stores and restaurants are everywhere,
Survival was not just about avoiding authorities, it was about avoiding others who were equally desperate. Bandits, rival outlaws, and mercenaries competed for scarce resources, ambushed each other, and often killed for territory or food. Unlike in modern times, criminals could not rely on alliances, contracts, or neutral territory. Any encounter could turn violent in an instant. Trust was a dangerous commodity, and betrayal was common. Even skilled criminals had to be constantly alert, prepared to defend themselves with weapons, traps, or cunning. A single misjudgment, trusting the wrong person, or being too slow to react, could end your life. Survival was never guaranteed. It depended on vigilance, strategy, and sometimes sheer luck. Medieval England had little understanding of disease or hygiene. Criminals living outdoors were exposed to contaminated water, parasites, and infections. A simple wound could become deadly. Without medical care, even minor injuries could lead to gangrene or death. Malnutrition weakened the body, making illness more likely. Life as a criminal in medieval England was a constant battle against man and law, but also the environment itself. Surviving required resilience, but even the strongest could fall to disease in a matter of days. Imagine facing hunger, frostbite, infection, and exhaustion all at once, while knowing a single mistake could bring death from law enforcement or rivals. This was reality for every criminal in medieval England. Survival wasn't guaranteed, it was a daily, relentless struggle. Beyond physical challenges, criminals faced immense psychological pressure. Constant fear of capture, betrayal, or death weighed heavily. Isolation from society, inability to trust anyone, and the stress of living in hiding eroded mental resilience. Many criminals became paranoid, anxious, or desperate. The strain of knowing that any misstep could lead to execution created a relentless mental burden, making mistakes more likely and survival even more precarious. Even those who survived longer periods lived lives of continuous vigilance, rarely resting, constantly moving, and always planning their next meal, shelter, or escape. Modern notions of crime, planning, getting away, or serving short sentences did not exist. Every day was a fight for life itself. Finally, consider the skills required. Survival in the medieval wilderness demanded knowledge of edible plants, water sources, tracking, hunting, and basic first aid. You needed to understand local terrain, the habits of villagers, and patrol schedules. Without these skills, death was virtually certain. Most modern people, accustomed to technology and urban life, would not last a day. Even seasoned criminals trained for city life often perished when forced into rural forests or wilderness areas. Skill alone was not enough. The unpredictability of weather, human vigilance, and chance encounters meant that survival was fragile, exhausting, and dangerous. Life as a criminal in medieval England was a precarious, exhausting, and dangerous existence, where every moment demanded caution, strategy, and endurance. To survive as a criminal, you had to
Avoid detection by law enforcement and vigilant villagers. Find food through hunting, foraging, or theft without being caught. Protect yourself from rival criminals and bandits. Endure exposure to weather, disease, and injuries. Maintain psychological resilience under constant fear and stress. Possess practical knowledge of the land, survival skills, and evasion techniques. Even with all these abilities, the chances of surviving more than a day were slim. The combination of law, community vigilance, natural hazards, and competition made life outside the law almost impossible. A single lapse, hunger, exhaustion, or misjudgment could mean death. This is the reality medieval criminals faced: harsh, relentless, and unforgiving. Life was a constant fight for survival, and failure meant public humiliation, mutilation, or death. Even if you escaped capture for one day, the next was equally dangerous. There were no second chances, no leniency, and no mercy. In medieval England, crime was not only illegal, it was suicidal. By now you understand the dangers faced by ordinary criminals, the harsh punishments, the perils of survival, and the relentless pressure of daily life outside the law. But there was an even greater force in medieval England: the king's justice. The monarch, his sheriffs, and his appointed officials had immense power, and defying them was not only dangerous, it was almost always fatal. Medieval England was a monarchy where the king's word was law. The king's authority extended to every corner of the realm, and anyone who committed crimes against the crown or its interests faced the harshest punishments imaginable. Crimes such as rebellion, treason, or stealing royal property were seen as direct attacks on the state. The penalties were designed not just to punish the individual, but to reinforce the king's absolute power. Even noble criminals were not exempt. If a noble rebelled or disobeyed the crown, they could face execution, property confiscation, or exile. High-status criminals were often made examples of, their deaths carefully orchestrated to warn others that wealth or rank could not protect you from the king's justice. While the king's power was supreme, enforcement relied on sheriffs, constables, and other royal officials. Sheriffs were responsible for maintaining law and order in counties, collecting fines, and apprehending criminals. Their authority was extensive. They could summon posse comitatus, a group of local men required to assist in capturing criminals. Failing to comply could result in fines or imprisonment. Essentially, the entire community could be mobilized against a single criminal. There was no anonymity, no safe space, and no escape from the king's law. Medieval England's legal system was heavily biased in favor of the state. Courts were public, proceedings were often brief, and verdicts could be harsh and immediate. For serious crimes, trials could be mere formalities. Evidence standards were low by modern standards, and confessions, sometimes extracted through torture, were enough to condemn a criminal. Punishments meted out by the courts reinforced the king's authority. Executions were public spectacles, often carried out in prominent locations to remind everyone of the consequences of defiance. Hanging, beheading, or burning were not just punishments, they were displays of power. Even if you survived one encounter with the law, another could come at any moment. Royal justice was relentless, thorough, and omnipresent. The king's justice relied heavily on local communities. Villagers, bound by tithings and communal responsibility, were incentivized to report criminals. Failure to do so could result in collective punishment. Essentially, society itself became an enforcer of the law. A criminal could hide for a time, but eventually vigilance, gossip, and collective action would likely lead to capture. Escape was temporary, and survival depended on constant movement and extraordinary skill. Even hiding in remote forests or among sympathetic allies carried risks. Word of your presence could travel quickly, especially if bounty hunters, sheriffs, or the king's men were involved. The entire social fabric was structured to prevent criminals from thriving. You were never truly alone. Every neighbor, every traveler, and every official could turn against you at any moment. Crimes against the crown carried even harsher consequences than common offenses. Treason, rebellion, or theft of royal property often led to death sentences designed to inspire terror. Hanging, drawing, and quartering was one such method. Some rebels were executed in multiple locations, their body parts displayed along major roads to send a chilling message. Other severe punishments included imprisonment in dungeons, starvation, or forced labor for years. Royal justice was methodical, strategic, and designed to maintain order. Unlike local punishment for petty theft, which served as a warning to a town or village, royal punishments communicated the reach of the crown. The message was clear: no one, regardless of status, could defy the king and survive. The king also empowered bounty hunters and mercenaries to track down criminals. Bounties were posted for wanted individuals, incentivizing commoners to hunt them down. Unlike today, where criminals might hide safely for weeks, bounty hunters in medieval England were relentless. A single report could bring a posse to your hiding place within hours. Survival required extraordinary planning, constant movement, and often alliances with others equally desperate to avoid capture. Even the most skilled criminals were vulnerable. One slip, a miscalculated route, an overheard conversation, or a misstep in the forest could lead to capture. The king's justice was not just about punishment, it was about absolute control. Life outside the law was never truly free, and survival was a fragile, fleeting condition.
To summarize, medieval criminals faced a system designed to ensure rapid and absolute consequences. The king's authority was absolute, and crimes against the crown were punished mercilessly. Sheriffs and royal officials patrolled towns, villages, and forests, empowered to apprehend and punish criminals. Royal courts dispensed justice swiftly, with minimal regard for defense or evidence. Local communities were mobilized to enforce the law, leaving no safe haven. Bounties and pursuit ensured that hiding was temporary at best. In essence, survival required extraordinary skill, knowledge, and luck. Even the cleverest criminals were constantly at risk. In medieval England, the law was not a distant, abstract concept. It was omnipresent, omnipotent, and inescapable. One misstep could end a life instantly. The king's justice created an environment where crime was not just risky, it was almost impossible to survive. For the average person, the streets, villages, and forests were filled with danger, patrols, and vigilant neighbors. Every decision mattered, and every mistake could be fatal. The system left no room for error, no mercy for weakness, and no hope for prolonged criminal survival. After exploring the dangers, punishments, and relentless enforcement of medieval England, the question remains, could a modern person survive as a criminal in this world? The answer is a resounding no. Let's break down why. First, consider the basics of survival. In medieval England, criminals had to find food, water, and shelter without modern conveniences. Outlaws hunted, foraged, and sometimes stole to survive. They needed knowledge of edible plants, animal behavior, safe water sources, and seasonal changes. Modern people, accustomed to grocery stores, restaurants, and indoor plumbing, would likely starve within hours or succumb to exposure. A single night in the forest, unprepared for rain, cold, or insects, could be fatal. Even a short lapse in attention could be deadly. Unlike today, where emergency services exist, there were no hospitals, ambulances, or rescue operations. Infection, hypothermia, or dehydration could kill faster than the law ever would. Next, consider the omnipresent law enforcement. Medieval criminals faced sheriffs, constables, bounty hunters, and vigilant villagers. Everyone was accountable for reporting criminals, and communities were tightly knit. There were no hiding places, no anonymous cities, no passports or forged identities to rely on. A modern person unaware of patrol schedules or village loyalties would be discovered almost immediately. Even the most skilled evasion techniques of today, running, hiding in a car, or using technology, would be useless. Medieval England demanded intimate knowledge of the terrain, local customs, and community networks. Without these, survival was nearly impossible. Beyond survival skills, modern people would struggle to navigate social and legal norms. In medieval England, petty offenses were harshly punished, and minor missteps could lead to whipping, mutilation, or death. Modern assumptions about fairness, negotiation, or self-defense would be dangerously naive. Every interaction, asking for directions, seeking help, or even passing through a village could result in suspicion, accusation, and execution. The social fabric worked against the criminal. Communities enforced the law, and local customs prioritized obedience and hierarchy. Ignorance was not an excuse, it was a death sentence. Medieval punishments were swift, brutal, and designed to terrify. Stealing a loaf of bread could mean public humiliation or hanging. Murder brought execution in front of the town. Treason guaranteed hanging, drawing, and quartering. Witchcraft accusations could lead to burning. Even minor assaults resulted in maiming or whipping. A modern person unfamiliar with the stakes or the limits of acceptable behavior would quickly find themselves on the wrong side of justice. The consequences were immediate. There were no appeals, no probation, no police warnings. One mistake, one misstep, and the modern criminal would meet the same fate as countless others: pain, humiliation, and often death. Even if a modern person managed to avoid capture for a short time, the psychological burden would be immense. Constant fear of being discovered, the stress of hunger, cold, disease, and exposure, and the isolation from familiar society would quickly wear down any individual. Medieval criminals lived lives of perpetual vigilance. A modern person, used to comfort, technology, and social support, would likely panic, make mistakes, and die within hours or days. Life as a medieval criminal demanded not only physical skill, but mental toughness, strategic thinking, and deep understanding of the environment. Without centuries of survival knowledge, the odds were stacked overwhelmingly against you. History offers countless examples of criminals who failed to survive. Thomas de Lacy, Alice Kittler, Fulk Fitzwarren, highwaymen, and petty thieves all faced relentless pressure, brutal punishment, and the constant threat of betrayal or capture. Even skilled outlaws like Robin Hood are exceptions in legend, not reality. The vast majority perished within days, weeks, or months. Survival was rare, temporary, and dependent on extraordinary skill, cunning, and luck. A modern person suddenly transported into this world would lack the training, knowledge, and instincts necessary to survive. Hunger, exposure, disease, law enforcement, vigilant communities, and ruthless punishment would claim them quickly. Even a single day would be a near impossible challenge. So, could you last a day as a criminal in medieval England? The answer is no. The environment was harsh, the law relentless, and survival required skills most of us have never learned. Crime was not merely illegal, it was suicidal. The forests were treacherous, the villagers vigilant, and the king's justice merciless. One wrong move could end your life instantly, and the world offered no second chances. Medieval England was a world where law, community, and nature combined to make survival for criminals nearly impossible. It was unforgiving, brutal, and swift. So the next time you think crime is risky, remember this. In medieval England, even the cleverest, bravest, or luckiest criminal would struggle to survive a single day. One day, nothing more, was all they were given.